Picture this. It's July 30th, 1930. The most important football match in history is about to kick off. 93,000 people have been waiting inside the stadium since 8 o'clock in the morning, 6 hours before kickoff, just to get a seat. The noise is insane. The stakes are enormous. And the Belgian referee, a man named John Langenus, walks out onto the pitch holding a ball under each arm. Not one ball, 2 balls. Because Argentina and Uruguay, the two teams about to play the very first World Cup final in human history, had both brought their own ball, and neither of them, not for a single second, was willing to use the other team's. So Langenus stood there in the middle of the Centenario Stadium in Montevideo with 93,000 people watching, pulled a coin from his pocket and flipped it. Argentina won the toss. Their ball, the Tiento, was used in the first half. Argentina led 2-1 at halftime. Then Uruguay's ball, heavier, larger, the T-Model, came out for the second half. Uruguay won the second half 3-1. Final score, Uruguay 4, Argentina 2. The team whose ball was used in each half won that half. Nobody talks about this. Nobody. And yet the very first piece of controversy in World Cup history wasn't a red card, wasn't a dodgy penalty, wasn't an offside goal. It was a ball. It has always been about the ball, and for the next 96 years, it still is. This is every FIFA World Cup football explained. The leather era, 1930 to 1966. Let's start with something nobody puts in the history books. Football in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s was played with a leather ball stuffed with a rubber bladder. Sounds fine, until it rains, because leather absorbs water, and when it absorbs water, it gets heavy. A ball that weighed around 14 ounces at kickoff could, on a wet afternoon, double in weight before the final whistle. 14 ounces going in, 28 ounces coming out. Players were heading what was effectively a soaking wet brick, with their unprotected foreheads, in boots barely more sophisticated than actual work boots, and then walking home and going to their day jobs the next morning. These men were tough in ways that modern football cannot even imagine. The Federale 102 in 1934 in Italy, the Allen in 1938 in France, the Duplo T in 1950 in Brazil, the Swiss world champion in 1954. Each one slightly better. Each one fundamentally the same problem. Leather, lace, rubber, prayer, water. And here's the thing that really gets me. Through all of this, through the wet bricks, through the laces that hit you in the face when you headed the ball wrong, through boots that destroyed your feet, legends still happened. Pelé, at 17 years old, picked up one of these leather balls in Sweden in 1958 and scored twice in a World Cup final. He was a teenager with a ball that barely went where you told it. Greatness doesn't wait for better equipment. The top star in 1958, the crack top star in 1962, the Challenge 4-star in 1966. England's tournament, England's only World Cup, Jeff Hurst's hat-trick, the crossbar goal that may or may not have crossed the line, the argument that has literally never ended. Through all of it, 36 years of football, the same basic technology, the same fundamental problem, the same wet brick. But someone had been watching, and they were about to change everything. The Adidas Revolution, 1970 to 1982. Here is a fact that will stop you in your tracks. Right now, if I asked you to close your eyes and picture a football, any football, the image that appears in your head has a very specific design. White surface, black pentagons, hexagons, that classic pattern you've seen your entire life. That image in your brain, it comes from one ball, one World Cup, 1970. Research has shown that when people around the world are asked to draw a football from memory, 99% of them draw the Telstar design. Not because they've studied it, not because they chose it, because Adidas designed that ball in 1970 for one very specific reason. It needed to be visible on black and white television, and in doing so, accidentally rewired the visual memory of the entire planet. Think about that. One ball, one tournament. And now, 55 years later, that image is still the default definition of football inside the human brain. That is cultural power on a level that very few products in history have ever achieved. But here's what makes it even more extraordinary. The actual match balls used in the 1970 World Cup, the ones Pelé touched, the ones that were used in the game of the century between Italy and West Germany, had no branding, no logos, no Adidas name, no tournament markings, just 20 white hexagons and 12 black pentagons, plain and clean. Only 20 of them were ever made for actual match use. 20 balls for an entire World Cup. The branded ones you see in museums and shops? Those were sold to the public separately. The real ones were silent, unmarked, and almost completely forgotten. And from that moment in 1970, every single official World Cup ball has been made by Adidas. Not one exception. 56 years and counting. Then in 1974, the Telstar Durlast. Same design, better waterproofing. And in 1978, something even more beautiful arrived. The Tango. Named after Argentina's national dance, designed for Argentina's World Cup. And here's the piece of design genius inside it that nobody explains properly. The Tango had 20 panels, each decorated with 3 curved shapes. But when you look at the ball, when it sits in front of you, your brain doesn't see 20 panels. It sees 12 perfect circles. An optical illusion, mathematically embedded into a football. The eye is tricked every time. The pattern is technically 20 shapes, but visually becomes 12. It's a magic trick printed on leather. Players picked it up in training and just stared at it. The Tango was so beloved that Adidas kept the design across 12 consecutive years, 1978 and 1982. Not one update, not one refresh. Because why fix perfection? By 1982, the Tango España had a synthetic waterproof coating. The ball no longer absorbed rain. After 50 years of wet bricks, that was quietly one of the most important innovations the sport had ever seen. The next step was obvious. Remove the leather entirely. The synthetic age, 1986 to 2002. 1986. Mexico, the Azteca, the first fully synthetic World Cup ball. Polyurethane panels over a foam core. No leather anywhere. Lighter, more consistent, weather-resistant. And Maradona used it to commit the most audacious act of cheating in football history, punching the ball into the net with his left hand and convincing the referee it was a header. And then, 4 minutes later, used the exact same ball to score what FIFA later voted the greatest goal of the 20th century. 2 of the most iconic moments in World Cup history. Same ball, same match, same man. 4 minutes apart. The Etrusco Unico in 1990. Its panels decorated with Etruscan lion heads taken straight from ancient Italian art. The most elegant ball in World Cup history, used in the least elegant tournament. Low scoring, defensive, grim, but visually stunning. 1994 in the USA. The Questra. A new foam layer for softer touch and faster rebound. Brazil won on penalties. Roberto Baggio stepped up, needing to score to keep Italy alive. He struck it. It soared over the bar. He stood there with his hands on his hips, head slightly bowed, and the image burned itself into football history forever. The Questra bounced perfectly every time. Baggio still missed. Some moments are not about the ball. 1998 in France. The Tricolore. The first multicolored World Cup ball in history. Blue, red, and gold, echoing the French flag. Zidane put 2 headers into the back of the net in the final. France won 3-0. The ball dressed itself in the colors of the winners before the tournament even began. 2002. Japan and South Korea. The Fevernova, gold and red, inspired by Asian calligraphy and art. Lighter than any World Cup ball before it. And for the first time, a few goalkeepers mentioned, quietly, with diplomatic caution, that the ball moved slightly unpredictably in the air. Nobody paid much attention. The next ball made the whole world pay attention. Very loudly. The Chaos Years. 2006 to 2010. 2006. Germany. The Teamgeist. 14 thermally bonded panels. No stitching in the traditional sense. And the smoothest surface of any World Cup ball in history. Faster. More aerodynamic. And goalkeepers started properly complaining for the first time. The Teamgeist dipped and moved unpredictably on set pieces. Coaches muttered, players rolled their eyes. It was nothing. An absolute warm-up act for what was coming. 2010, South Africa, the Jabulani. And I need you to understand just how bad this was. 8 three-dimensional panels. Grip and groove technology pressed into the surface. So aerodynamically smooth that when struck with no spin, what players call a knuckleball, the ball behaved like something from a haunted house. Left, right, dipping, rising, sideways, completely and utterly unpredictable. The quotes from that tournament are extraordinary. Iker Casillas, one of the greatest goalkeepers who ever lived, called it a beach ball. Fabio Capello said it was the worst ball he'd seen in his entire career. Lionel Messi described it as very difficult, which from Messi is practically a scream. England goalkeeper David James, a man nicknamed Calamity, James for a reason, called it dreadful and horrible. The Craig Johnston, designer of the famous Adidas Predator boot, told a newspaper, and I'm quoting directly, that whoever was responsible for the Jabulani should be taken out and shot for crimes against football. FIFA's own Secretary General stood in front of the media mid-tournament and admitted, mid-tournament, while the World Cup was happening, that they were not deaf to the criticism. And here's the fact that takes this from funny to genuinely ridiculous. The Jabulani was designed at Loughborough University in England. The English designed the ball that England's own World Cup manager Fabio Capello described as the worst he'd ever seen. But, and this is the one that really gets me, the one that goes beyond jokes and actually matters emotionally. The 2010 World Cup was held in South Africa, the first World Cup ever held on African soil. That was not just a sporting event. That was a cultural moment of enormous importance. An entire continent hosting the world's biggest tournament for the first time in history. The vuvuzelas, the color, the pride, an atmosphere unlike anything football had ever seen. And the conversation that dominated those 6 weeks, in every press conference, in every broadcast, in every newspaper on the planet, was about a ball. A piece of plastic that refused to fly straight. That tournament deserved better. That moment in history deserved better. And the Jabulani stole from it in a way that I don't think has ever been properly acknowledged. There's one more thing. Here is the detail that explains everything and that nobody ever mentions. The stadiums in South Africa sit at altitude. Johannesburg is 1,750 meters above sea level. At altitude, the air is thinner. And in thin air, aerodynamic balls move more, deviate more, and behave more erratically than they would at sea level. The Jabulani at sea level was probably fine. The Jabulani at altitude in South Africa was a catastrophe. The ball and the venue created a perfect storm, and football paid the price. Adidas went back to the drawing board. They listened. Harder than they had ever listened before. The smart ball era, 2014 to 2026-2014. Brazil, the Brazuca. Named by Brazilian fans in a public vote, over 1 million people voted. Brazuca means the Brazilian way of life, and Adidas made sure this ball would live up to its name. They'd been developing it since 2009. 2.5 years of performance testing, 600 professional players across 30 teams in 10 countries on 3 continents. Lionel Messi, who had complained bitterly about the Jabulani 4 years earlier, personally tested the Brazuca and said, and I quote, "I've had the opportunity to try it and it's great." The seam length on the Brazuca was 327 centimeters. The Jabulani's seams measured 203 centimeters. That extra 124 centimeters of seam depth, less than the length of your arm, is literally the difference between the most hated ball in football history and one of the most praised. Adidas also added 50,000 tiny, microscopic bumps to the Brazuca's surface to improve grip and prevent the knuckling effect entirely. 50,000 bumps. That is the level of detail that goes into correcting a mistake. And then, this is my favorite fact in this entire story. The Brazuca had its own Twitter account. Before the 2014 World Cup began, the ball was tweeting, posting, sending messages to fans from the perspective of the ball itself. It was the first inanimate object in football history to have a social media presence. The Brazuca had a verified Twitter account before some presidents did. Germany beat Brazil 7-1 in the semifinal. 4 goals in 6 minutes. The Maracanã, the most famous stadium in the world, went from the loudest noise in football to absolute silence in less than 10 minutes. The Brazuca flew perfectly every single time it was kicked. Some collapses are entirely human. 2018, Russia, the Telstar 18, a tribute to the original 1970 design, reimagined with a pixelated black and white pattern that looked like digital static. Inside the ball, an NFC chip that fans could tap with their smartphones to unlock exclusive content. A football you could have a conversation with. France won the tournament. Mbappé was 19 years old and somehow already looked like he'd been doing it for decades. The Telstar 18 was good, but the next ball was something else entirely. 2018, Qatar. The Rihla, Arabic for the journey. Inside that ball was a 500 Hz inertial motion sensor, a chip that tracked the ball's exact position in space 500 times per single second and transmitted that data wirelessly in real time to the VAR system. The ball knew where it was. The moment a player's boot made contact, the system knew the precise kick point. When the ball crossed a line, any line, it reported it before a human official could process what they'd seen. Offside decisions that once took 4 agonizing minutes of replays, freeze frames, and arguments were confirmed in seconds. Because the ball told the system first. The Rihla was also the first World Cup ball ever made entirely from water-based inks and glues. No harmful chemicals, no animal products, nothing. The most eco-conscious match ball in 92 years of the tournament. And according to FIFA, it was also the fastest World Cup ball ever made, traveling through the air faster than any of its predecessors. Goalkeepers complained. In the final, one of the greatest football matches ever played, Argentina led France 2-0. Then Mbappé scored twice in 2 minutes, 2-2. Then Messi scored in extra time, 3-2. Then Mbappé scored a hat-trick to make it 3-3, becoming only the second player in history to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final and still lose. It went to penalties. And Messi, after 2006, after 2010, after 2014, after every near miss and every heartbreak and every question about whether he was good enough on the biggest stage, finally lifted the trophy. The Rihla witnessed the most dramatic match in World Cup history and filed a 500 times per second data report the entire time. And now, 2026, across the United States, Mexico, and Canada, the Trionda. Spanish for 3 waves, 3 nations, 3 colors woven into the panels. Red for Canada, blue for the United States, green for Mexico. Gold accents for the trophy that all 3 nations want to see lift above their soil. 4 panels, just 4. The fewest in World Cup history. Fewer than the Brazuca's 6. Fewer than the Jabulani's 8. Fewer than the Teamgeist's 14. Fewer, far fewer, than the Telstar's 32. The panel count has been falling for decades, the surface getting smoother, the flight getting cleaner, the ball getting closer to a perfect mathematical sphere with every iteration. And inside it, a side-mounted 500 Hz sensor chip delivering real-time data directly to AI systems, to VAR, to officiating technology. The ball participates in its own refereeing. It is not an object anymore. It is a collaborator. From a waterlogged piece of stitched leather that a Belgian referee carried under one arm in Montevideo in 1930, to a 4-panel AI-connected sphere crossing the pitch in New York, Los Angeles, and Mexico City in 2026. That is 96 years, 30 tournaments, hundreds of millions of people watching, thousands of players, coaches, goalkeepers, dreamers, and through every single moment of it, every goal, every miss, every penalty, every heartbreak, one object was at the center. Never celebrated, never thanked, just kicked, headed, caught, thrown, and kicked again. But here's what I want you to think about the next time you watch a match. Every goal you've ever celebrated, every free kick that bent impossibly, every header that looped into the far corner, every screamer that hit the top of the net from 30 yards, It happened with one of these balls. Every heartbreak, too. Baggio's miss. Mbappe's hat trick that still wasn't enough. Brazil's silence on home soil. The ball was there for all of it. It doesn't have favorites. It doesn't feel pressure. It doesn't know what's at stake. It just goes where physics tells it to go, carries whatever the moment asks it to carry, and never complains. We should be so lucky. 96 years of football, 30 balls, one game, and it all started with a referee walking onto a pitch in Uruguay with a ball under each arm, reaching into his pocket and flipping a coin. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if Uruguay had won that coin toss. Tell me in the comments, which ball do you think changed football the most? And which era do you think had the best design? Because I genuinely have a strong opinion, and I'll put it in the pinned comment. I want to see if you agree.